How are you, Pete?
Yeah, good. I'm very good, Mike, and great to be on your show. And thanks to those who are listening for tuning in.
Pete, so I was looking at your book, and it was really interesting to me. So if I can articulate, I suppose the point was one of those things you were saying, really in the book is if you have the mission, the men, and me, and you lose one, you lose all three. I mean, would that be basically right? And is that kind of what is this new book about? Lead me into the second book.
Yeah. So the both books are really my way of paying something back. When I first got out of the military in 2006, I realized that I was the fortunate benefactor of one of life's most esteemed privileges, and that's leading teams across continents, cultures, and different contexts, military, corporate, community. And, the book itself, my new book, is about the first part of that journey and what I learned along the way in that journey. But one of the things my former military unit taught me was with privilege comes a responsibility to pay something back. And the best way to do that is to share knowledge. Knowledge is the catalyst that enables our species to evolve. Without it, we stagnate. And, it wasn't, I didn't come out of the military thinking I'm going to write a book. It just kind of emerged as something to do. And everything you do is based on what you know and what's going on around you. So if you remember back to 2006, 2007, both Afghanistan and Iraq were still, in full-fledged combat. We had men dying, getting injured. Many of my friends were among those. And, when I stepped back and looked at things, I realized, we weren't learning anything. We weren't internalizing these lessons that we were learning along the way that, a lot of good people gave their lives and limbs for, but we kept doing things the same way. And, that's what kind of motivated me to put on paper some of the basic lessons. And they're, as I say in the open of that book, the real lessons of combat are not about, the stealthy approach with, of night vision clad commandos, or, how you primed a door charge. The real lessons are to be found in how we think, how we make decisions, and how we execute those decisions. And so, that's what my book's about. The first one, always listen to the guys on the ground. When in doubt, develop the situation. Humor your imagination. That's what I was trying to do with the first book. The second book is kind of an extension of the first book. And the second book was also based on just a series of insights I had. Both books are about common sense, but, it was sometime after my first one came out that I realized, even though I talk about common sense all the time and tell everyone that's the way we operated in my former military unit, this was really the first time I ever paused to consider, what is common sense? What's the definition? And I started doing research on it on the internet, periodicals, and what I found was, science has pretty much turned their back on common sense. So has philosophy, and there really is no standard definition of what common sense is. And you can test that yourself. You can bring 50 people in a room and ask them if they know what common sense is, and they'll all say, of course I do. And then if you ask those same 50 to define common sense, you're going to get 50 different answers. So, the question I wondered was, how can it be that we all know what common sense is, even though we don't know what common sense is? And as I would discover, the reason is common sense is biologic. It's inside us. It's the way the human brain is hardwired to make decisions and solve problems. And the more I researched it, the more I realized that, wow, if I really could have used all this information while I was in the military, and I know any first responder could use it, and anyone who works in business could use it. And so, I began aggregating what I was learning. At the same time, again, very fortunate to be leading a big geographically dispersed team, about 125 people. And so, we started by default kind of experimenting with common sense. They would ask me, hey, what's the new strategy? And I'd say it's the same as the old strategy. It's common sense, use common sense. And so, along the way, we started describing things differently. And that's where, in my new book, The Common Sense Way, you see this thing called the language of common sense. And it's based on the fact that to change the way you think about anything, you have to change the way you speak about it. And, I didn't set out to come up with a language of common sense. It just happened. When you're operating the common sense way, you describe things differently and you pass on knowledge differently. And it was those actions, the outcomes of those actions that produced what I now call the language of common sense. And I know, your site's very focused on strategies and methodologies of thinking. And, one of the highlight real concepts is this concept of developing the situation. I mentioned it in my first book. I redefine it at a higher level in my second book. And I show what a practical decision-making, problem-solving technique it is for any type situation, whether life-threatening or routine, in any context, combat, business, or life.
You had a couple great points, and there's so many amazing takeaways. I mean, I think in your first book, you said basically, when you're in that event, you have what you can see, you have what you know, and you have what you can contextualize. And so it was an interesting point, and it was speaking that truth or speaking that out loud. And it kind of is fascinating because I think Steve Pinker said that the idea is, there's a finite amount of language that we have, right? A finite amount of words, but there's a million different ways that we can articulate those words into sentences. And so you're talking about that. So it's fascinating to me. Where did you get this? Because you're articulate and you're able to take something very complex and distill it and say common sense. But when I look at these takeaways, and guys have told me, people DM me or emailed me, said, this is going to be a good interview because Pete is such a smart guy. It's a great book. And I still read it. And I'm like, so how are you able to take something very complex and distill it? Did you have that from growing up and learning and reading books? Or is this something that you learned on the teams and someone taught you?
Yeah, I think I got to give credit where credit's due. In the unit, your reputation is based on what you say and what you do, and the two have to match, or neither one of them are credible. So not only do you learn to say what you really think, but you refine that along the way, and a big part of that is the benefit of circumstance. When you're in combat all the time, everything you say has to be parsed. Especially if you're talking on the radio to an OP team that's in contact, you can't sit there and pontificate and do a lot of and you've got to be right to the point, and you've got to understand how to persuade people without the traditional backwards ways of coercion or threats or implied threats, whatever. And again, biology provides us with an answer of how you do that. The brain is only persuaded when it understands the logic of why something makes sense. So we can be told to do something and not really understand the logic of why it makes sense. And we can go do it, but we're not putting everything into it because we don't understand. It's not making sense in our brain. And so, having the opportunity to work, when I left the military, I worked in a biotechnology company, and that's what got me onto the whole biology of our brains and our bodies. And so working with very smart people who spent their whole lives writing papers about, sense making and how the brain works, was very helpful because I could go around and bounce things off them. And, it dawned on me again, that's why I continually say I'm a fortunate benefactor, because plenty of people know a lot about leadership, and plenty of people know a lot about biology, specifically the biology of our brains and our senses. But having the opportunity to kind of, go from one to the other enabled me to really hone in and understand what parts of this biology are really important and what parts, are way above my head or not relevant to, conducting an operation or persuading someone. So, you said it. It's really elementary. Understanding the way our brains think and make decisions is called metacognition. It's understanding the way we think and make decisions. And when we understand the way we think and make decisions, we can make better decisions and think better thoughts. And so, a decision sounds like this massively complex thing, but our brain always, again, parses everything down to the simplest possible, format. And the way we make sense of what's going on around us is we take the adaptive stimulus of what we're experiencing and we combine it with what we know. If we don't know anything, then, walking outside of your cave for the first time in your life is going to be a shocking experience. You don't know what the sun is. You don't know what a tree is, a rock. So we make sense by taking in sensory information and bouncing it off what we already know. And from that process, that 1 + 1 equals why we do what we do and why we choose what we choose. And again, when you understand that equation, that metacognition equation, you can understand that we're only good as what we know. And a leader's job who is taking care of their people is to make sure they're armed with all the knowledge they need before they go into a situation. And that knowledge is not the kind of knowledge that we sometimes think of, massive textbooks and whatnot. It's really those guiding principles that are ubiquitous. They can be applied to almost any situation. And so, that brought me back to my first book, things like always listen to the guy on the ground. And, that one is not just a catchy phrase. That is reinforcing back to that equation. You can't make a decision without context. So if it's what's going on around us plus what we know equals what we're going to do, if we don't know anything, then, the equation is messed up. We're going to get the wrong answer. And if we're not observing what's going on around us properly and making, taking it at its basic sensory level, then we're not going to come up with the proper answer to it. So, the biology part is simple when it's explained. And I think most of the time, especially my new book, everything in there, I could have ended every chapter with, I wish I had known this when I was in the military and when I was in the corporate world. And, I would have been much better off. Having said that, the military, I did know what it was. I did know common sense. I just couldn't describe it. I couldn't tell you the definition of it. And I did know that you have to pay attention to what's going on around you to make sense of it. I just didn't know why that is. And I didn't know how you pay attention. And, this new book describes both those processes.
Now, are you a superstitious guy? I mean, the Romans said absid nomen, which is you avoid the name, you avoid the curse, right? So you don't speak it out loud, but yet you're saying, say something. So what if you don't have information and you have to make a judgment. I mean, I think, to paraphrase, you said something like audacity is the opposite of, structure, or the opposite of fear. So what do you do when you don't have all the information? I mean, you just say, the hell with it, I'm just going to go for it, or is it still a calculated, and I would assume to some level, a calculated decision?
Yeah, well, that's where develop the situation comes in. When in doubt, focus on what's going on around you. We learn to adapt. If you don't adapt, you die. And again, biology explains adapting. Whenever you learn something new, your brain physically changes. That's what neuroplasticity is. Neuro is the neurons. Plasticity means plastic. Your brain changes every time you learn something new. So hopefully your brain is changing right now. My brain is changing. You and I just met. And so when you understand that you have to adapt to survive, and the only way to adapt is to learn, you realize how important it is to learn. So, one of the things that struck me, in Ranger School that I learned is, a basic private was when you go out on a dismounted patrol, 100 meters out, everybody takes a knee, takes their hat or their helmet off, and they look, listen, and smell to familiarize themselves with the local environment. And that's the first step in learning to adapt. When in doubt, learn. Again, when we got on the ground in Afghanistan, in those first months, the end of 2001, beginning of 2002, there was no plan. We had outrun the plan. We had outrun the electronic tentacles of the chain of command. And so we asked ourselves, how do you organize if you have no guidance on how to organize? And, what the conclusion we came to was the same conclusion that, explorers, inventors, and entrepreneurs have come to over the ages. And that's, use common sense and develop the situation. And so developing the situation, the definition of it is learn from, adapt to, and interact with what's going on around you. And that's the common sense way to make decisions and solve problems. And a very easy way to understand it, first, its utility is to look at the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1803. Lewis and Clark and the Corps of Discovery, as they were called, had to move from St. Louis to the Pacific Ocean without any guy on the ground knowledge of what was in front of them, any knowledge of the weather, the terrain, the indigenous populations. And, Lewis and Clark didn't plan for that They prepared themselves with every possible thing they knew that they might need. And that starts with food, water, and ammo, in this case, so that you could, so that you can eat. But that's developing the situation. And, we can see it every day, that it is the common sense way, to solve any problem. And just take the example, if your lights go out in your house at night, you don't light a candle to come up with a 10-step plan for how to fix it. You immediately begin learning from, adapting to, and interacting with what's going on around you. You try the lights in your room and in different rooms to see if it's just a plug or if it's throughout the house. And you realize that it's throughout the house, so you learn to adapt, and you continue interacting by sticking your head out the front door and looking at the houses in your neighborhood. Is their power on or is it off? You see that their power's on, so you learn to adapt again, go down the basement, check the fuse box, check the circuit breakers. And the level of developing the situation and the amount of time it takes depends on the complexity of the problem. That's an example of a simple one, but Lewis and Clark takes us to an ongoing problem. And that's all they did. They just developed the situation along the way, learn from, adapt to, and interact with what's going on around you, and share the knowledge you learn, and you will be as high of a performing team as any team in the history of humans.
I think you have a great ability to actually, explain, or you're just very descriptive. I mean, you had that chapter, I think chapter 5, where you talk about the AC-130s. You're going in and you're just talking about, you check your chute, and it's very descriptive. I can imagine what you're actually doing, but then you're actually talking, you're using anecdotes and you're using your personal experience. And I think that's important because you're able to tell people, the distinction between what is an event and what is a trend, and what they should look for. So again, it's common sense. You're not saying this happened to me, so therefore everyone should follow suit. You're saying, no, lean on what you know. And I think that's very insightful. So let me ask you something. What are the resources that what's your best resource? Is it, people? You seek wisdom in the counsel of many? Or do you use, some people cannot be anywhere without their iPhone, their tech, or is it a book? I mean, what do you do when you need help? What's your best resource?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, and every situation is different. So, if you're out in the wilderness, where you go for help is going to be different than, hanging out in your corporation or with your team in the military. And but I would say it's always, to talk and exchange knowledge with the people around me. Throughout my life, I've known, there's always people much smarter than me around me. Probably one of the benefits of not getting very good grades in grade school and high school is, you just accept your lot, and you realize you gotta collect key bits of info. You're never going to be, the walking mainframe computer that some people are. But if you focus on the right things and you really grab hold of those, put them in your brain for permanence, and you pressure test them, I think, you learn as much as you can, and that is a key part of it. You're always learning, but you're always pressure testing, because, not only do you have to pressure test knowledge, but, the world is always changing. So the knowledge we know today might be irrelevant tomorrow. However, common sense will remain the common ground and the common language that connects us all. So, 50, 100, 500 years from now, everything will be different. But what will be the same is the way our species, our Homo sapiens species, makes sense. We all make sense a common way. That's why it's called common sense. And that's why we all have 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose, a mouth, a brain, a spinal cord, packaged inside our body and elegantly wrapped in skin. That's how we make sense of the world. Our senses interact with the world at a molecular level, and our brain takes that sense and turns it into something we can use. Really important part of the brain that, everyone should know, especially first responders, is, the brain's the most complex thing known or ever has been discovered in the universe. So trying to fully understand the brain, even for someone in neuroscience, is a difficult task. But there's a very simple way to understand the parts that affect that metacognition we talked about, the way we think and make decisions, and that's the triune brain model. And it's a very simple model, and it's a very accurate model. It's just reflective of, we don't actually have one brain, we have 3 brains in order of evolutionary development. The brain on the bottom is our reptilian brain, the brain we had when, our species were reptiles. And just like reptiles, it's a cold-blooded, selfish brain. It's there just to keep you alive. It's the part of your brain that reacts to anything perceived as danger. And the way it does that is binary. It's not some massive complex formula. It just separates familiar from unfamiliar. So familiar things are seen as safe. Unfamiliar things are seen as dangerous. So, you know, a bump in the night is seen as dangerous, and that's a good thing. But so is a new way of operating. So is a new language. So is a new place to live. And, you know, as I said, these are in order of evolutionary development. Reptiles don't learn. They never change their behaviors because they can't learn from their experience. And that's where the emotional brain, the second brain that sits on top of the brainstem is. In our emotional brain, you know, evolutionary biologists believe the reason it evolved was so we could learn from our experiences. And that's how we learn. To learn any experience, you have to feel the experience. So, you know, emotions aren't this thing that need to be discarded. They're the way we, you know, we process knowledge and the way we categorize our memories. You know, emotions, the emotional brain is mostly in charge of positive emotions, which are happiness, you know, love, compassion, all the emotions that help us function in societies or in groups of two or more people. The one thing about our emotional brain that we need to always keep in mind is, you know, the evolution of humans, not Homo sapiens, but humans, goes back between 4 and 6 million years. That's a long time. Our species, Homo sapiens, it's believed have only been around about 200,000 years. But what it tells you, that 4 to 6 million thing versus the 200,000, is that for 99.5% of the time that humans have existed, we existed as hunter-gatherers. And hunter-gatherers who spent all their time sneaking around trying to make sure there wasn't a saber-toothed tiger around the next rock, or someone who looked a little bit like them who was going to club them over their head and take the rabbit pelt, you know, that they just got hold of. So our emotions are not irrelevant. They're just outdated. Today, we have very few life or death survival situations. There's no saber-toothed tigers jumping out from behind rocks. So in many cases, our emotions today are overreactions to minor modern day trivialities. You know, a good example of that is if a loved one accidentally steps on your toe when you're not looking, your reaction is, you know, a scream of, you know, WTF, what was that? And what was that? That was your unconscious, first to respond emotional brain operating completely without context. Because a key thing to understand about both your reptilian and emotional brains is they can't monitor ongoing sensory information. The only part of your brain that can do that is the third part, our thinking brain, which is our neocortex. It's the biggest part of our brain. It sits on top. That's the thing with the folds in it. And the neocortex is, you know, is everything. It's who we really are. The only way you can make sense of anything in life is to engage your neocortex. And that's an important point because it's not always engaged. We're usually operating off of our emotional brain, either our instincts or our autopilot emotional brain. The other thing to understand about it is, just as I said, you know, the neocortex is on top, emotion in middle, reptilians on the bottom. Most of our sensory information comes up through our spine, so it's bottom-up information, and that has an effect on the way we perceive things. Go back to that reaction to the kid stepping on your toe. Our first instinctive reaction to any type of stimulus is always unconscious, uncontextualized, and emotional. It takes about a quarter second for sensory information to make it to our thinking brain. So it hits our survival, our reptilian brain, and our emotional brain first. And that's why our reaction is always emotional. But we have this amazing thing I talked about, neuroplasticity. Your brain can adapt, and it adapts by learning to turn off the reptilian and emotional brain. And another good example that shows you this is road rage. And you can read any DMV handbook about road rage, and they're actually pretty good, because road rage happens to everybody. At some point or another, you're driving along, all relaxed, and someone cuts in on you, and what the, and you can go to all different levels of that. I'm trying not to swear on your show, but you'll catch yourself doing that, and that's, again, your reptilian and your emotional brain reacting to the perceived, threat to your survival and the encroachment of your space. That's part of our reactive brain too. When someone gets too close, we react. So, the reptilian and emotional brain react. If you just take that quarter second and engage your neocortex, you suddenly go, it's just some old guy, he can barely drive, or it's a mom driving her kid to the hospital or to school, and they didn't do it on purpose. And so you immediately shut that down. You shut that anger, that rage down, and you're also training your brain, your neocortex, to override the other two brains, which is incredibly important. We can turn on our neocortex with actions. Up till about 10 years ago, it was believed that thoughts control behaviors. And now we know it's actually the other way around. Behaviors control thoughts. And a couple of quick ways. If you're on the highway, say you're stressed out, you're thinking about your day, you're in traffic, you got a pit in your stomach, adjust your rear view mirror, look at it, and force a smile up onto your face. By doing that, you will turn on your neocortex and pay attention to what's going on around you. And I'll tell you why why it works in a second. The other way you can do it that's much simpler, and people have been talking about it for hundreds of years. Thomas Jefferson said, when mad, count to 10. When really mad, count to 100. And Teddy Roosevelt said, I used to be afraid of grizzly bears. I used to be afraid of horses. I used to be afraid of other men with guns. And I didn't know how to overcome that until I just started pretending like I wasn't afraid. And when I pretended I wasn't afraid, I became brave. He controlled his emotions with his behaviors. To turn on your neocortex, it's as simple as taking a couple of long, slow, deep breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth, and counting to 10 or count backwards from 10. And why does that turn on your neocortex? Because your thinking brain's the only part of your brain that can understand language and speak. It's also the only part of your brain that can take control of unconscious behaviors. So your reptilian brain is what makes you breathe. We never think about breathing. But when you take conscious control of that, the only way you can do it is with your neocortex. So you can't make yourself breathe without engaging your neocortex. You can't make yourself happy without engaging your neocortex. You can't understand language without engaging your neocortex. So, for first responders, especially, but anyone who's in a stressful situation, all those old, witty, principles of take a deep breath, stay calm, think, really work. And it probably should be considered the most important weapon that any first responder carries onto the battlefield. We do our checks, our weapon combo nods before we go out, but we should all be checking our neocortex and how to engage that neocortex, because that's our thinking brain. It's the only part of our brain that can monitor real-time sensory information. So again, remember, when you're angry, you can only think angry thoughts. You're incapable of thinking about compassion or calm. When you are afraid, you can only think thoughts of fear and how you can end those thoughts. You can't think of how to, fool your opponent or how to move around to the side to get behind a rock or a tree to take cover and maybe flank the person. That can only be done when you engage your neocortex. So, if I was to give one bit of advice to anybody, in a life or death situation, it's to understand how to engage your thinking brain, practice it, and use it whenever possible. And of course, pass on how you did it to others.
Now, there's a lot of information out there. I mean, we've got the age of tech, right? So we've got computers, we've got, you can read any file you want, man. So you can go to any library online and look at data. So what are you curious about? I mean, what are the things that really engage your mind, stimulate your brain? And I mean, you're searching, and is it Xbox games, or what are you looking at, man? Outside of what you've been doing, are your hobbies the same as what you were doing in your working life?
Yeah, well, now I'm so I wrote my new book, finished that off, and about 3 years ago I started a company called AddArmor. I think you mentioned it earlier, and so I run a company too. But I mean, as far as what questions and what jazzes me, it's the science of nature. That's what biology is, and so I'm fascinated by nature. And I'm fascinated by our own biology. And, I think in today's world especially, it's even more important to re-immerse ourselves in nature and human biology because, common sense is becoming an uncommon commodity today. And, one of the things I talk about in my new book in chapter 7 on leadership climates is that common sense leadership is learned. We can talk about it. It's very helpful. You can hear someone talk about it. It's very helpful. But in the end, as far as leadership goes, you really need to see it in action. You need some kind of model that shows you, how and why to be a common sense leader. And our biology is what explains that. Our biology is what tells us why common sense leadership makes so much sense. So going back to our foundation of knowledge and what got our species to where we're at today, we would not be here if it weren't for common sense. We have not been following plans from the past or guidance from disconnected chains of command ever until these last couple hundred years. And, we're big and we've got a lot of cool technology that keeps us alive now, but we're not always going to have that. And the one thing you can always depend on is your senses and your own biology. And if you immerse yourself in understanding that, not only will it help you make better decisions and think better thoughts, but it'll allow you to be who you really are in life and to achieve the things you really are capable of achieving. And, again, I'm not saying that is, some kind of, sell to go look at what I'm saying. I'm just telling people that the biology of your brain has the answers, the simple answers, and common sense is still the way we humans are hardwired to make sense of the world and to interact with each other.
As far as habituation, I mean, what do you do now? How do you stay atop of things? Are you still doing, you're folding the blanket on your bed, every morning, bouncing a quarter off of that thing? Or what do you do to get atop of things and using everything that that common sense? I mean, what is your structure every morning or every day so you are a producer?
So, great question. And first off, one reason I went to the unit I went to and spent 13 years there was because it was founded on the principle of common sense. And, I went through OCS and basic training, was in regular military units, first part of my career. And, I never saw the sense in making a bed so tight that you could bounce a quarter off it when you should be out zeroing your weapon, your nods, talking to the other guys on your team about what they've learned and learning about the environment and the people you're going to go out and interact with. I bring that up front because the unit taught me, to operate off common sense, and there's a lot of information coming out now about that in different ways. Time management is a huge thing, and you have to be at one with cutting away trivialities in your life, so you can focus on the things that matter. And, that's not an easy thing to do because your priorities are constantly shifting and they have to shift. But taking a hard look at every decision and, kind of understanding, hey, I'm not going to get tied up doing that trivial task right now because I need to go read, or I need to go talk to one of my people who said they have something really important they want me to know. So, I think that's part of adjusting to modern day life. We all have our different priorities, but again, use common sense. And when you do that, I think you'll improve your schedule and improve, your productivity at the end of the day.
All right, let's roll into AddArmor. So this is really interesting to me, and I like the video. It's a minute 30. I'm going to go ahead and run it, and let's go ahead and talk about that, shifting gears and trying to apply, some of the things that are in your book and how it works with AddArmor. But stand by, guys, and let's talk about this. But stand by for the video. 1 sec.
Okay.
The world we live in is complex. The increasing frequency of violent crime, terror attacks, active shooters, and politically inspired spontaneous anarchy have led to an alarming increase in safety and security issues for freedom-loving people across the planet. Key to surviving any life-threatening situation, no matter how complex, is to make sensible choices about what to do next. To make sensible choices, you have to have options. And that's where AddArmor comes in. AddArmor's anti-intrusion protection package provides you, your loved ones, and your employees with options. Our highly experienced combat, business, and law enforcement veterans from the world's most elite organizations have combined with the lightest, strongest, and most advanced armoring technology to provide protection options that up until now were only available to business executives, diplomats, the rich and famous, and heads of state. We are AddArmor. We turn regular vehicles into mobile safe rooms.
Great video, man. Who was the narrator?
You probably figured that out from listening.
Great videos. Yeah, very exciting, man. So tell me about AddArmor. I mean, what is that? I think you've been doing it since 2018, but I only glanced at it yesterday. So can you spin us up on that?
Yeah. So, I left my job in biotechnology to write this book. I left in 2015. The book I was trying initially to write it while I was still working. It was just too complex, required too much time, too much research. And so, I left to write this book. That was 2015. Within about 3 years, I had most of the book shaped out, most of the, key facts and principles, positioned properly where I wanted them. And I could tell, I still had plenty of work to do to make it flow, make it coherent. But I had time, and I thought to myself, I need to get back to work. I missed work. I don't know how. I'm just not hardwired not to be doing something. And that's not nervous energy. That's, again, when you understand your brain. Once your brain stops plasticizing, you're on a road to the cemetery. We stay alive by keeping our brain active, engaged, and challenged. And work is where you lead. If you're not doing something else. So I miss leading, and I wanted to get back to work. One of my goals in my 10 years in the corporate world was to start my own company and run that company based on common sense. And I always believed that you could have a significant competitive advantage in any industry if you just use common sense. And I'm convinced of that after watching for 10 years, Common Sense versus None. So I went, started exploring, started developing the situation to figure out what I'd do next. And I thought I'd go back into biotechnology. I love the industry, love the science. And I was actually talking to someone about being the CEO of a startup when someone else walked up and, just asked me if there was anything else I'd want to do and what I learned in special operations. And, I told them, well, there's a lot of things. And one of the things I mentioned was armoring vehicles, because I led a special project to do research on how to armor our low-vis vehicles at the unit. So I got the opportunity to go around to some large armoring companies, the ones who do the defense contractor armors, and learn the process of armoring. And then I went back and drove around in many of those vehicles in Iraq and Afghanistan and learned practical application of what that armor does. So, in the end, I had this opportunity to, start an armor company. So I went, did the research, developed the situation, did a worldwide market survey of the armoring industry and found out, it's projected to be a $25 billion industry by 2024. This was in 2018. And the biggest growth was expected to be North America. And so I then looked at the competitive environment in North America and discovered that there really weren't any big armoring companies. There's no, especially think in terms of Google or, Facebook or Apple. If you were trying to be an internet startup now, you would be, wow, I can never do this because I can't compete. But there weren't any. And then I just started thinking about the practical application of it. And my conclusion was this is something, that could really grow and could be really fun to grow. My vision was, a veteran-owned and operated company, hires all kinds of people, but also hires veterans. And the idea, the foundational idea behind AddArmor is common sense. And the idea behind AddArmor is to create a mobile safe room that protects the vehicle's passengers against criminals, terrorists, active shooters, or politically inspired anarchists, while also providing peace of mind that cannot be gained from an unarmored vehicle. We Americans spend $26.4 billion a year on home security and spend almost zero on security of their vehicles. Why not? Well, let's just think about it. Think in terms of your own town, your own area, wherever you live, and a natural disaster happening. So I'm out on the West Coast. We have earthquakes, we have fires, you name it, gas leak, any of that can happen. Now think about where you, your loved ones, and or your employees will be when that happens. Probably all over the place, work, school, in transit. And how will you contact them if the cell grid goes down? The answer to all of these involves going from point A to point B to point C in your vehicle. And when you think in terms of the importance of that vehicle in any kind of life or death survival situation, you can't come to any other conclusion than it makes sense to add armor. And what we've done is changed the concept. So, when you think of an armored vehicle, you think of this hulking mass, that weighs a lot, affects the vehicle's performance and costs a lot. because, there's no magic way to install armor. Everything in the vehicle has to be taken out, and then it has to be custom fit. So we came up with what we call the anti-intrusion protection package. And that package, all we do is replace the factory installed windows with ballistic glass, and we put lightweight ballistic panels in all the doors and back hatches. So on your basic, let's say Ford Explorer SUV, we add about 500 pounds of weight, a little less actually, which is less than two men sitting in your vehicle. And we don't affect any parts of the performance of that vehicle. And we don't touch any of the mechanical parts of it. We just replace the glass and put those panels in the door. And in North America, that's all you need. You don't need your floor armored, because you're not going to be driving over improvised explosive devices. You don't need your ceiling armored because, snipers are not going to be shooting at you from an overpass or from an incredibly steep cliff downward. So, you need to protect the parts of your vehicle that, have the potential to, that require a need to be protected. And so, the windows and the doors we found will not only protect you from random shots, but no one can get in that vehicle. And you saw in the video, that window was shot 12 times and hit with that bat 12 times, and it still didn't bust. And if you think in terms of some of these videos we've seen of these riots, these, political riots, and, these poor people trapped, in lines on highways, and they're just getting their car, hit with skateboards, kicked in. It's an unbelievably, difficult situation to be in, but that's where peace of mind comes in. If you have ballistic glass in there and panels, they're not getting in your vehicle. They're not busting through those windows. Your loved ones, your employees are protected, and you've got peace of mind. So that's what it's been, and it's been a total joy working it. The company's growing. We have big plans for it for the future, but I apply everything in my book to the company. I make decisions based on common sense, and when people ask me why should I do this, or help me wrap my head around this, I explain it to them using logic and common sense, and it's not a hard sell. That package I quoted, I described to you, we can put that on a basic SUV for about $28,000, and sometimes less on the smaller SUVs. So it's it's an affordable process. We've made it affordable. Doesn't affect your vehicle, but it provides you with that peace of mind that cannot be attained in an unprotected, unarmored vehicle.
I think you guys did a very good job conveying what the options can be. A lot of websites, you look at it and there's this feeling like, okay, this is out of my range. It's so tactical. It's kind of scary. As a consumer, you probably understood the demographics and the need. And so, to me, I look at it, it's kind of like a buffet, like Amazon or something. You can go on and it's click, click, click. You can upgrade here. You select this vehicle as a military, is it civilian? And so I think it's very, very palatable, right? So it's digestible to a lot of people. You see it immediately and say, okay, this is cool. I can understand it. So the user interface is great. Did you anticipate a change in culture, a shift in culture? I mean, in 2018, this is before the protests that we're seeing all over the U.S. and all over the world. Was it just a hobby that you wanted to do into a business, or were you anticipating something happening in the next 5 or 10 years?
I don't think it, for any common sense person, I think, to anticipate what we just been through over the last year would be like anticipating 911. I mean, we called 911 a failure of imagination, and a lot of those riots last summer and whatnot are the same thing. We could never have imagined that, a situation could occur where, where anarchists would be allowed to just tear up cities at will.
Mhm.
And in consonance with that, and it's an important contextual point, in consonance with that is the neutralizing or the neutering of our law enforcement personnel. And, you know, you feel for those guys, what they've been through, but you also understand the common sense reaction that police departments had and will continue to have, and that's to stand down, you know, instead of aggressively rushing to the scene of a crime. You know, they're not going to do that now. And they're, first off, they don't have the budgets, they don't have the manpower, they're not getting the equipment. And so, you know, I don't think anyone could ever have predicted those two things would happen at the same time, that, you know, anarchists would be allowed to create anarchy,
Mhm.
and our police, our amazing police, would be hindered from stopping them. But that's exactly what happened. And, you know, so no, I didn't see that coming, but I did see, you know, the Antifa riots have been going on for a while. And, you know, one that totally affected me happened, you know, a bit before I made the decision to start AddArmor. And that was, I think, believe it or not, it was up in Portland again before, you know, Portland burned. And it was one of these crazy things where they were out on the street just beating up cars, and the camera panned over, and there were two motorcycle cops sitting on the sidewalk watching it. And a guy drove through the street, and he had North Carolina license plates on. And, you know, apparently to someone in, you know, Portland, a North Carolina license plate is a sure sign of, you know, someone from the country or whatever. And they just attacked this guy, and it was an old, you know, it was probably late 70s. And they just started beating up his vehicle and breaking his window, trying to pull him out of the vehicle. And, you know, I just saw that helplessness of that guy and thought, you know, this may be something that whose time has come. You know, not just the niche people that, you know, want the protection, VIPs, dignitaries, whatever, but your common people. And you know, I never forgot that. I still have the videotape of it, because it sums up everything. You know, these anarchists being allowed to create anarchy, and the people who normally stop them being handcuffed themselves and not being allowed to respond. So to me, that is what made the idea make even more sense. And, you know, what's happened since then is just piled on to that, you know, that logic. And we don't, you know, there's no hard sell involved in this. People come to us. I always talk them through, or one of my veteran customer service reps, we talk them through, you know, what are you concerned with? If you can tell us, and we'll meet with people if they want to meet. And then we almost always end up talking people down, you know, talking them from B6 is the highest level. It's what we used in Iraq and Afghanistan all the time. It will stop 7.62 machine gun fire, you know, RPGs. But most people come in, they say, I want B6. And, you know, it's the most, by far, expensive, time-consuming process. But we almost always talk them down and just say, you don't need that in North America. And, you know, you'll probably regret it, because, you know, when it creates a tank, a mobile tank. And, you know you're in a mobile tank when you're in a fully armored floor ceiling vehicle. You can feel it. You know, everything about the vehicle has changed. It handles differently. And if you don't need it, why have that? On top of that, you know, the most important thing for any ambush, and the first step for anyone who ever either walks or drives into an ambush, is to run or drive out of the ambush. So speed, as you know, military and police teach, is security. And if you're slow down that acceleration or that braking power, you've slowed down your chance to survive an ambush. So we're very sensitive about that. We want the vehicle to look exactly how it came in. We want it to perform exactly the same way. And we want people to be happy with their product. Back to the police, we've been doing a number of police departments' vehicles. I wish, I could get police departments more money. All of them would have ballistic windshields and at least their doors, the ballistic glass and panels in their front doors, which, think of cops, they use that as their shield. When they're in a firefight, they get out and get behind the door, but they don't have the budgets. They do not have the resources, and I wish they did. We'd make our police a lot safer and probably ourselves in the process.
So where can they find you? What's the schedule? So are you guys going to go to SHOT Show coming up next year? Or are you guys, where can people see your business?
AddArmor. So yeah, they can just log on to the AddArmor website. Our main facilities out here in Ontario, California. And so just log on, contact us, and start the process, and we'll take it from there and guide them through to wherever they want to go with it.
Cool. Very cool, man. So last question for you. What is your tip for making the world a better place? I mean, you're a guy who's done a lot. He's done a lot more than a lot of people will ever do. You've written books. You've been a high performer. What's your advice to our people watching and for posterity?
Yeah, so it shouldn't surprise you. It's to use common sense, to go back to common sense. And we talked about making sense. There's a basic principle: believe in and trust your senses over every other thing you have. That was valuable advice 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 10 years ago, 1 year ago. It's probably 10 times as valuable now. Why? Because you can no longer believe what you see and hear over electronic media. You have to apply, you have to look at it, everything now, through the lens of this might not be accurate. And that's not like conspiratorial or anything, that's real. We've watched that happen over and over. And it's unfortunate because, who would have ever thought you can't believe what someone on network television or cable news is telling you, but we now know that's true. And, it's actually an insight and a revelation, because we don't need electronic devices to enable us to make sense of what's going on around us. We only need to believe in and trust our senses. That starts with engaging your neocortex, taking a deep breath, a couple of deep breaths, counting to 10, speaking calmly, also turns on your neocortex, versus shouting does not. But speaking calmly turns on your neocortex, and it does something else. Common sense is contagious. So is calm. In the same way that if you see a herd of deer in the woods, when one deer goes stock still and then bolts, all the deer follow. And our nervous systems are built the same way, with mirror neurons that take cues from other people. So calm is also contagious, but we don't need the mass media to tell us what does or doesn't make sense. And whether it's a natural disaster, I'll give you an example. I was living in this house during the big fires of 2018 out here in California. A good friend of mine had his house burned down just 2 blocks away. And, there were all kinds of conflicting reports on the news media, coming from the news media. There were helicopters flying. Some stations were telling you evacuate, others were saying stay in place. On top of all that, a lot of people were scared. But I decided I'd just follow my own advice, and I stepped out of my house and I paid attention to what was going on around me, the terrain, the weather, specifically the wind. I knew the wind was coming out of the south, blowing in that direction in my house. I knew the terrain around my house, and I got up on some high ground. There's hills all around my house, and so I could see the terrain real time. And if you understand terrain, you understand the way fire moves. Fire very rarely burns downhill. It'll burn uphill, but fire follows terrain. So it follows ridge lines. If you see a ridge line, if a fire is on a mountain and there's a ridge that comes out of it, like a spine, it's going to follow that ridge out. So you don't want to be on the end of that ridge. And I could see by the wind and the terrain that the fire was going to go right around our house. It was going to follow the ridge behind me and the ridge to our east. And it did that. And, that's where knowledge comes in. I have a bunch of friends who are fire chiefs. And one of the lessons they told me was, never leave the black. In the black, you're safe. And that means the burnt out area. So once a fire passes you, it's not going to turn around. There's no fuel for it. So while other people continued to evacuate and panic, we just stayed put in our house and never had to leave, never had any problem with it. And the same thing applies to the virus. In those first few days and weeks after the virus, if you recall, there was no mask ordinances, there was no social distancing, there was no plexiglass barriers. So how could we have made sense during the initial phases of the virus as to how contagious it was? Once again, our senses. Believe in and trust your senses. If you looked around you, you could see that people in airports, in grocery stores, package delivery people, were not getting sick in any numbers higher than the general population, which is a great indicator. It's called the canary in a coal mine. Is a great indicator that a virus or disease is not highly contagious, and that if you just follow cold and flu prevention measures, washing your hands, sneezing into your arm, staying home when you're sick, then this virus was not any more contagious than the yearly flu. So, believe in and trust your senses. That's what I tell people. That's the answer. That's how our species got to where we are today. And it's the only way we're going to get to where we need to go in the future.
I think, reality has objects, and those objects are symbols, and those symbols are some type of meaning to our mind. So I think we can liken it maybe to the Terminator or the Predator. I think you said something where you're scanning, you go left, right, left, man, baby, man with a gun, man with a gun. And so you're interpreting those symbols, and now you are responding based off of your training, your experience, et cetera. Would you say it's like that with common sense?
Totally.
Yeah.
You got it.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
So, great stuff, man. The Common Sense Way. You got the Mission, the Men and Me. Fantastic books, guys. Check out Pete. Please check out AddArmor and his books. Pete, it's been great to have you on, man. Please don't go anywhere. Would love to chat with you a little more, guys. Thanks for watching. Appreciate Pete. Any last words? Anything you want to share with us?
No, just thanks for listening, and check out the book.
Killer, man. All right.